Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Wraithblade by S.M. Boyce. Narrated by Wayne Mitchell. Though you plant the seed of thought in another, be patient, for how and when it sprouts is not yours to control. Unknown. Chapter 1. King Henry.
Damn them!
Henry sucked in a breath through clenched teeth as the searing pain in his side scorched his withered soul. Hot blood streamed over his fingers from the many stab wounds in his back and stomach. His shirt stuck to his chest, the Montgomery family crest woven into its silk threads, stained almost black. Those traitors, those thieves, come to take his throne. His throat tightened, and he could no longer quell the violent cough building in his chest. Dark red splatters hit the ancient stone in the labyrinth of corridors beneath his great castle. These passageways were as old as the land around them, as steeped in blood as they were in history. Henry refused to become a mere footnote in the books the scribes kept. His knees buckled, and the corridor tilted beneath him. The cold air of the castle depths stung his throat as he pressed his shaky fingers against the cool rock for balance. His vision blurred from the loss of blood, and he paused for a moment to breathe, to regain his composure. Somewhere behind him, the drip of water hitting stone echoed through the hall, steady as the ticking of a clock. It would not have long until they found him once again. His escape from the attack had been a fluke, really, a stroke of luck amidst the chaos. If he were to survive this treason, he would need to act quickly. Each breath tasted of iron and rust. With every beat of his racing heart, a bit more of his life poured into his hand. He couldn't cover all the wounds to stem the bubbling flood, but he did somehow force himself to stagger on. Each step left a thin trail of dark red along the gray rock beneath him, enough for even a novice tracker to spot and follow. He couldn't hide his route, not anymore. He had one last hope now, only one escape from the walls that should have protected him. His leather boot caught on a raised stone in the castle floor. His castle, damn it all! And he stumbled. The cold, rocky wall caught him, and a jagged corner of one of the blocks dug into his arm as he struggled to catch his balance. He coughed, and more spatters of red flecked the ground before him. He had to get to the rift. It was his only hope.
Just die, you coward!
A voice echoed down the hall.
Come out here and die like a man!
One of the hunters, searching for him.
You are near death,
a grim voice said, echoing through his mind like a reaper. Unprompted, a specter appeared before him, a once great king's ghost that had granted him so much. His fame, his wealth, his title. This ghoul alone had gotten Henry to where he was, and now it seemed as though the creature would be his undoing. The Wraith King. There was the chill down a grown man's spine, present and able to kill even when it couldn't be seen. Henry was immune to its sword and bony fingers, and the only man alive to claim as much.
Move!
Henry demanded, blood pooling on his tongue. It didn't. Henry pushed himself off the wall, staggering forward through the ghoul. Its skeletal face neared, and as he took a step toward the tattered black scraps of its cloak, its haunting form dissolved into the air.
Kill them,
Henry demanded with a weak nod over his shoulder.
You could decimate them all.
Perhaps, if not for the blades two of them wield, it admitted.
They have prepared for tonight, and you have not. They have something that can kill even me, and you are not worth dying for."
"Coward," Henry muttered, still stumbling forward. The creature laughed, the rasp dry and haunting.
"I am wise when you would be a fool, old man. I lose very little if you die."
Henry scoffed, and more blood pooled in his mouth alongside his growing disdain for this and this thing. This wretch didn't obey him. It merely tolerated his presence when once they had conquered entire armies together. To think of the sheer number of men he had killed to control this monster, even his own soldiers, his own friends. And now he wanted nothing more than to rid himself of it. It had cursed him. Henry pushed his dying body toward a great archway at the end of the hall, toward the lone sconce flickering in the shadows of an ancient chamber. His vision blurred again, and the fire's amber light floated farther away with every step. Lost in his pain, consumed by his singular purpose, Henry's ragged breaths caught in his chest like cold air on a mountain. This far beneath his castle, in tunnels only a handful of souls knew existed, he would make his escape. He would heal, and he would return with a vengeance. And this far gone in the power of the Wraith King, vengeance was all he knew. The archway finally neared, as did the elaborate circle of glistening green stone in the center of the small room beyond it. By some miracle, he had made it to the rift, a pillar of magic that had cost more coin to construct than most kingdoms hoarded in their treasuries over an entire century. Though some said it was as old as time itself, Henry knew better. As breathtaking as it was to behold, this enchantment was made by men, and the legends elevated its status beyond what it was in order to keep its power from the common folk. The commoners were given trinkets, toys to play with, devoid of real magic. True power, like this, was reserved for kings, for men like Henry. His knees fell hard on the gem-like stone, and he leaned a bloody hand against the perfectly polished crystal for support. As he stained it red with what little life he had left, the pillar glowed beneath him. Magic this powerful demanded sacrifice to function. He would oblige it, but not with his own body. To use the rift, he had to bleed a man dry, and he wouldn't sacrifice himself. Now he simply had to wait for one of those fools to find him. He strained his ear, listening intently now that he had made it. The distant drip of water, slow and rhythmic, filled the void between him and the traitors until, there, yes, there, through the steady pulse of the water, came the dull echo of footsteps, emerging like a beast from the shadows. It seemed he wouldn't have to wait long. Raggedly breathing as he knelt on the glowing platform, Henry briefly closed his eyes. He couldn't sleep. With this much blood loss, sleep would mean death. He merely needed a moment, just one, to catch his breath.
"There you are,"
one of the hunters said, his voice louder now.
"That's right," Henry replied gruffly. "Here I am."
He could feel the weight of the assassin's stare on his neck. With his back to the traitor, he could imagine the smirk of a common man who thought he could kill a king. But Henry was the chosen one. A man of the people, ascended to royalty by the fates themselves. He had scraped his way through hell to claim the great throne of Saldia. He had united the continent beneath his might. He had forced kings and queens alike to bow before him, only to slice off their heads as punishment for their rebellions against his rule. He would not lose it all tonight. Normally, a single man would hardly be a challenge, but after the attack, every breath ended with the question of whether or not the next would come. Henry had to conserve every ounce of energy if he was going to survive this, and he would. He had to. With the suffering he had endured up to this point, and this would not be his day to die. After all, there was retribution to be had. There was still much blood to spill before he went to the grave, and more souls to take with him along the way. Chapter 2. Connor. The chilling howl of the blight wolves echoed through the dense trees of the ancient woods. In reply, a cold wind kicked through the canopy of the wise old forest. The rushing torrent of air crashed through leaves like waves on a shore, momentarily even louder than the creatures haunting its grove. This wood had seen kingdoms rise and fall in its many centuries, and the mournful cry of the giant wolves held little fear for these timeless oaks. The howl briefly faded, echoing across the mountains, an omen of death. Any breathing thing in its right mind froze in place, waiting for the terrors to pass through the cold spring night. The hard branch of an old oak pressed against Connor Magnuson's back as he adjusted in his perch, high in the canopy. He had learned early on to sleep in the trees. It was a lesson he had gathered from all the skeletons he had stumbled across in his travels through this forest, their bones gnawed through and licked clean. Blight wolves showed no mercy, not to man, woman, or child. The legend said they knew only hunger. Death would come for Connor eventually, but he hadn't clawed his way through life thus far to end up as some beast's dinner. The brisk wind hounded the oaks again. His tree swayed as he tightened his threadbare coat and rubbed his arms to keep warm. Though he sometimes thought of home, of the small manor his father had built back in Kirkwall, he had long ago stopped wishing for fire and solace in the night. Those were luxuries out in this forest he had chosen to call home, luxuries a drifter like him couldn't afford. He settled into the rhythm of the breeze through the gnarled oaks around him, a song he had grown accustomed to during his years in this massive stretch of forest, and the creak of withered trunks as the wind danced through them, and the clatter of leaves, like applause from a long-dead crowd to a performance even time had forgotten. His own quiet breath added like an afterthought to an orchestra. And a scream, shrill and short, in the distance. It snapped Connor from his sleep like a slap to the face. He stiffened, straining to hear it again through the gale. It might have been a dream, nothing but a memory he had so often tried to bury. After all, it had sounded so familiar. But there, again, in the distance, a woman. No, a girl, her thin voice breaking with fear. From the direction of the scream, a green glow burned through the forest with unnatural intensity, barely 100 yards away. It blazed like majestic emerald smoke, a beacon of mischief and danger in the night. In that blistering instant, a puff of his breath froze on the cold air before him, tinged with green. After only a few seconds, the dazzling glow faded, and the midnight forest consumed the once brilliant flicker of light. Magic in the middle of a cursed forest. A little girl screaming for her life. In that moment, Connor had a choice. Up in the trees, isolated and a full day's trek from the nearest town, no one knew he was here. It was why he traveled the forests, drifting between villages and brief intervals of work where it could be found. And the freedom of being overlooked, of being forgotten, and that was the one power he had left to his name. But the forests hadn't hardened the last shreds of his heart quite yet. The blight wolves' faded howls lingered on the air as they chased something to the north. If he was going to make a move, now was his only chance. After a cursory pause to question his own judgment, Connor jumped into the dead leaves that lingered from autumn and raced through the tightly packed trees of the ancient woods toward the shrill scream of a child that shouldn't even be out here. He suspected he would not be the only one. The blight wolves sought the weak and vulnerable, the small. They hunted without care for what they killed, so long as it sustained them for a time. Some said the beasts had intelligence, that the bright green spellgust ore rumored to be in the nearby mountains had morphed them into something unholy, into creatures of insight and wit that sought to cause mankind, their only competition as predators, as much pain as possible. Connor couldn't say. Like all men with even an ounce of self-preservation, he kept his distance from those creatures. Still, he couldn't bring himself to let a child die, and there were other dangers in these woods to consider. Bandits, slavers, rogue soldiers away from the watchful eye of the King's Guard. The discovered, a different sort of human entirely, with green scales on their bodies and crystals on their faces, said to wield more power than any man could dream of. Out here, there was little in the way of law, save for the sword a man carried and the courage he had to face his own problems. As the thick oaks whizzed past him, mere shadows in the darkened night, Connor caught glimpses of the twin moons of Saldia as they slept in the sky. The two crescents cast a shimmer of soft blue light across the forest. He slowed as he neared a clearing close to where the green light had been, and he paused to take in his surroundings. Only fools rushed into battle with no thought or plan, and Connor was no fool. The ruins of a great cathedral stood in the middle of the field, the twin crescent moons framed perfectly on either side of the lone surviving spire that stabbed the sky. The crumbling walls betrayed a maze of what were once hallways and rooms inside the ruins. Once white boulders littered the field, stained with moss and time. For a moment, nothing moved. No one screamed. Not a sound swept through the cold meadow, save for the brief echo of a distant howl. Until, in the ruins, a shadow flinched. From the depths of the old building, a man staggered through the tall meadow grasses. They parted before him with every unsteady step, and he dragged something behind him as he stumbled into the field. Whatever he held flailed, its wild limbs scratching at his arm in the darkness as he held tight. It took only a moment to recognize a braid of yellow hair as the victim fought against her captor. This man held a girl, a child. "You must have one," the man wheezed. "A Rectivane potion. You peasants always have one hidden somewhere. Give it to me! Do it now, you filthy little maggot, or I'll kill you and whatever family you have!" Muffled screams escaped the little girl as the man's hand tightened around her mouth. As they struggled, she kicked his leg. He fell off balance and set his empty palm against a nearby boulder to steady himself, but his fingers slipped along the rock and stained it with dark red streaks. From the woods, a silhouette raced toward the pair of them. For a moment, Connor's chest panged with the dread of facing a blight wolf, until the shadow stepped from the darkness on 2 feet. A woman raced across the field with a dead branch in her fingers, and in a brief flash of moonlight, terror shone in her eyes as the man adjusted his grip on the child. Her child, most likely. The girl wrestled with him, his blood smearing across her cheek as his wide hand remained planted over her mouth. Connor drew one of the twin swords on his back. Whatever this was, it would not end well. In the whistle of the wind, there wasn't so much as another breath. He scanned the trees for signs of a trap, for arrows straining against a bow, for the flash of steel in the low light of the moons. He had a few enemies, sure, but none clever enough to plan a trap like this. With one last cursory look around, Connor noticed something truly odd, and it gave him pause despite the scene unfolding before him. A house in the trees. Through one of its foggy window panes, a second young girl watched the meadow with wide eyes. Perhaps only a few years older than the one on the ground, she pressed her blonde head to the glass. A house in the trees, a bloody man crawling through the ruins of an ancient building, a woman and her children, alone in a field at night. It seemed as though he had stumbled into something quite beyond him.
"Let my baby go!"
The woman screamed, her voice shrill with panic as she broke the branch across the dying man's back. The man winced and fell to the ground, dragging the child with him. The girl scratched her tiny hands against his face, her golden hair matted with blood as she tried to wriggle free. Yet his grip only tightened, his thumb pressing deeper into her cheek. The little girl's brows tilted upward with panic as she fought him. Her panicked gaze roamed the woods, frantic for help. Without a word, Connor slipped the thin scarf around his neck up and over his mouth to hide his face. In moments like this, he'd learned it was best to keep his identity secret. The King's Guard had been after him once, years ago. They thought they had killed him back then, and he didn't want them to learn they had failed.
"A man's name is all he truly has," his father used to say. "Don't let anyone tarnish yours, Connor."
A twinge of nostalgia tugged at the memory of his father, but he ignored it and stepped into the clearing. As he emerged from the shadows, the woman gasped. Her wide eyes darted toward him, and he assumed she couldn't decide if he was friend or foe. She would find out soon enough. It took only a few moments to close the distance between him and the tangle of makeshift fighters. The woman lifted the broken half of her branch, but Connor didn't look her way. He was focused on the man, the only threat in the field. When he reached the wheezing figure on the ground, Connor lifted his boot and cracked his heel across the man's nose. The snap of bone tore through the chilly night, and the stranger groaned in pain. His grip on the little girl instantly loosened, and she scampered out of his grasp. "Get inside," Connor ordered without looking at the woman. He stood with his back to her, strategically placing himself between her and the man who had held her daughter captive. If she were capable of killing anyone, she would have killed the man on the ground, and though she was still a stranger, he could safely turn his back to her, at least for now. The soft thuds of feet running through the grass joined in with the biting chill of the wind through the trees as the man tilted his head, his face slick with blood. He spit onto the ground, staining it red, and wobbled as he tried to stand. Before the man could so much as get to his feet, Connor kicked him again, nailing his stomach so hard that the man fell onto his back. A river of blood gurgled from the dozen or so stab wounds along the stranger's torso as he moaned in agony. Most of the fine silk of his purple shirt had been stained black with blood, and the vague hint of a coat of arms lay in the gold thread beneath it all. Connor grabbed the man's collar and lifted him until they were nearly nose to broken nose. Narrowing his eyes, he glared down at the pathetic man who would dare threaten a child. "Explain yourself," he demanded through the fabric masking his face, his voice gruff and deep. The stranger paused, his eyelids only half open. His eyes slipped in and out of focus, and with a cursory glance across the grass, Connor quickly realized why. A thick streak of blood led from the ruins of the cathedral, one long stain of everything a man needed to survive. Whoever this was, he didn't have much time left.
"Ottoman sent you, then?"
the man said, his sour breath hissing through his teeth as he winced with pain. He coughed, and Connor leaned back in the nick of time. Red splatters hit his chest rather than his face, but he didn't care about his clothes. He had seen worse. Connor waited for the answer that still hadn't come, refusing to move until he got it. "I don't know who Otmund—"
"Worse,"
the stranger interrupted, weakly waving his hand as if it suddenly all made sense.
"You think you'll take the ghoul for yourself, don't you? To be the Wraithblade? Fool!"
The man coughed again, but there wasn't much blood in him left to splatter across anything anymore.
"He's a clever bastard, that Otmund," the man continued. He'll kill you, too, no matter what he promised you'd get from this."
The stranger clutched Connor's wrist, his grip impossibly tight for how close to death he had to be. The man's eyes widened, and his other hand grabbed Connor's collar just as tightly.
"You deserve what's coming for you, boy. When you get to hell, I'll laugh. You and me, we'll spend eternity in the fires. From the moment I die, you're a dead man walking."
Connor opened his mouth to speak, to ask the man what the hell he was talking about, but his second silhouette passed through his periphery. He froze, wondering if the wolves had finally come, or if the woman was foolishly back to help. At first, all he could see was the darkness, the night, the vague hint of tree trunks beneath the moonlit canopy. As he glared into the woods, the shadow moved again, and his blood ran cold. A hooded wraith hovered at the edge of the forest, its skeletal features hidden partially by shadow as it watched them both with cold impartiality. As the last of the stranger's life bled from him, the creature floated with no feet among the ancient trees. Only the thin white bone of his hands peeked through a dark cloak that fluttered in a breeze all its own. A chill shot through Connor's heart like an icy knife through the chest. With the wraith's appearance, the chaotic scene finally made sense. The demands, the threats, the gall to threaten a child. Connor finally knew who this dying man was. And this was none other than the dreaded King Henry, ruler of Oakenglen and master of the freemen of Saldia. A man, maybe, but clearly more, said to be something other entirely. A man to be feared, a man who had conquered a great ghoul. A man who had used death itself to slaughter his enemies and secure him the throne. They were monsters, both of them. With a final sputtering breath, the king went limp in Connor's grasp. His body arched toward the grass as his weight tested Connor's strength. The dead man's eyes remained open, carrying the same expression now as when he'd spoken his final words.
"From the moment I die, you're a dead man walking," the king had warned.
And now, the merciless king was dead. The ghoul at the edge of the woods drew a jet-black sword from the depths of its dark robe. The tattered ends of its cloak billowed in the winds of death in a gust far stronger than the gentle breeze of the forest. It watched him, waiting. For what, he had no idea, but he suspected his moments were numbered unless he could find a damn clever way out of this. The dead king's grip loosened from around Connor's wrist, and the limp hand fell to the grass. Jaw tensed, Connor gently set the dead man on the ground, his eyes focused on the ghoul, on the bigger threat. The wind whistled through the trees, tense and angry and bitterly cold. The world around them went silent as the forest waited, curious as to what might happen next. The king's body glowed briefly green in Connor's peripheral vision. So soft and subtle, he almost missed the gentle hum of the dead man's body. A warped shadow rose from the corpse and hovered above the man's chest, suspended in time. In the second it took to breathe a single breath, Connor's gaze drifted from the ghoul at the edge of the woods to the shadow hovering above the king's corpse. And, in that moment, it became painfully clear the king had been right. Connor was a dead man walking, the target of a supernatural monster. Nearby, the king's dead fingers spasmed. Fast as a blur, the wispy shadow above the monarch's corpse darted toward Connor. In the same instant, the specter of death followed suit. It flew through the air like a banshee, the empty eye sockets of its skull trained on its quarry, on Connor. The gruel hit him hard in the chest, knocking him backward. From the moment of impact, the specter melted into nothing, into the air itself.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?